Hello, everybody. It's Guy from Vancouver, British Columbia. And today we're going to talk about the importance of shifting our attitudes towards harm reduction in the school system. And it's very, very important for us to remember that when we are doing talks that we want to reflect the lives of what youth are living through. And so one of the things that I always start with is that I never encourage youth to use drugs. However, if they are using drugs, I want them to use them safely. And so when I walk into a school and share my story with them, the biggest impact in a child's life is reflecting the reality of what they're going through. Now, if you go in there with the fear of saying, like my life turned out, super bad and I was addicted to drugs and I was injecting them, it doesn't reflect the realities of their lives. And telling them not to use the drugs, never really stops anybody. And a lot of the times when, even in the drug talks in schools that I was in, I was told that I was, bad for using them, that there would be consequences, the police would come after me, and that I would eventually wind up in jail. And I remember actually leaning over to my friend and saying, does this guy know that we're already using the drugs? And so, for me, it's about reducing the risks and the harms caused by drugs is very important in moving forward with our youth, because the main feedback that I get from the youth in the schools that I speak in is that they feel stigmatized and judged because they're using drugs. And there's a lot of reasons why our youth use drugs. First off, because they experiment and we experiment. And so telling somebody not to do them, or don't do drugs, don't have sex, don't get involved in crime or criminal behavior, that's not the reality in people's lives. People need to experiment and learn. And we have to understand that with the drug supply the way it is, the importance of harm reduction for our youth. In the schools that we speak in, we do naloxone training. We tell kids, listen, if you're using drugs, please carry naloxone, don't use alone. And I think personally, even when we can advance it even further, there needs to be drug checking in the school system as well. Because we already know that some of our students are using drugs. And so they should have the ability to be able to check those drugs. And a lot of the youth that I speak to, I've asked them these questions. If you found out your drug was positive for fentanyl, would you use it? And every one of them have said, absolutely not. And they reflect by saying the drugs that we're buying cost $5-10, and we're not trying to buy fentanyl. So that's very, them saying that to me is very important for me to understand where they're coming from. And one of the, I get a bunch of feedback from you telling me that, my story, although turned bad, in explaining it to them in a non-judgmental or stigmatizing way, because if they do one day develop a substance use disorder or an opioid use disorder, that they don't feel the same shame and guilt that hinders them from reaching out to be supportive. And so a lot of things have changed in British Columbia, and especially in the two school districts that I'm in, Burnaby and Delta, is that we meet people where they're at. And one of the things also in my conversations with youth is that, so there's many that are using drugs, but there's a lot that aren't. And they have friends that use drugs. And so after I speak, they come up to me and say, hey, I've just been telling them that not to do it because it's not good for you, but that doesn't stop them from doing it. And that's where I just encourage them. I just said, yeah, it's not something that, if no work, then why are we where we are today? Be more supportive, like check in on them saying, hey, listen, is everything okay? If you ever need any help or assistance, or want to hang out, please let's call and keep checking in on them. It's very important that we be supportive, because youth are just going to use substances, and that's the reality. And you want to remember why you used drugs when you were young, and why it, for whatever reason, some use for trauma, some use for peer pressure, some use because they like using them. I mean, there's many different reasons why people use drugs. We just have to be there to support youth through that. And, interestingly enough, I go do a talk in a high school, and there's a lineup of kids that want to share their story. And the number one thing that they talk about is being uncomfortable to talk about it. And so that to me is a real challenge. And when I hear that, I hear the same sadness and the same pain that I went through in the school system. It's very stigmatizing and very judgmental. And a lot of the kids are in the alternative program of the school. And I asked them, did you like the main school or do you like the alternative program? And they all love the alternative program just because it's not judgmental, and the teachers understand that this is the reality, and how do we support them. It's a really powerful concept that I think needs to be used right across the world, is because, just saying no just doesn't work. And if we move to look at reducing harms, and I know many youth that have told me that they overdosed and reached out about their struggles, and saying that they really appreciated the naloxone training, and that I wasn't judgmental. And how can I look at my own life and what I had to go through, and how hard it was to get away from it. I just can't be judgmental towards people who are using drugs. So remember, if you're doing talks in schools, do it in a way that reflects the realities of their lives. Instead of telling kids never to use drugs because they're bad, tell them that if they are using drugs, please use them safely. And if you ever need any help, please come help. I also think one of the things in the school system that needs to be looked at and addressed is that there needs to be people with lived experience working in the school system as well. Someone that the youth can actually, have a relationship with and relate to because of this person being through it. I could never picture a youth going into the community liaison police officer's office on a Friday saying that we're going to a big party on the weekend when there's going to be a bunch of drugs there. That's just not going to happen. And so, instead of that, there should be somebody there to say, hey, okay, if you guys are doing this, just do it safely. I want to see you back on Monday. And a lot of the schools that I'm going into now is because of the Christmas break that's coming up, and the importance of and the reality is that, especially with the pandemic, that youth are using more drugs. And so we wanted to make sure that they had all the proper tools in place, that if they were going to use over the holidays, that they were going to use safely. And we want to see them all back in school in 2021. And we want to see them have their dreams of getting a driver's license or, going to university and all these things. One mistake or one bad batch shouldn't mean the end of somebody's life. And because those dreams are crushed with that. And I think it's very important for us as we move forward to make sure that we understand that and understand that our youth are going to use drugs, and we just need to support them and support the people around them. I hope this inspires you to change your approach and how you talk about substance use to our youth. And just remember that if you're supportive, they'll reach out to you when they need the help that they need. Thanks for listening, everybody.